So we're going to run this session as what's called a goldfish bowl. A goldfish bowl is a round table where instead of having a fixed audience, we have 4 seats over here, and we have 3 speakers at those seats and an empty seat at the end. And anytime you feel that you have a question or a contribution to make, you can come and fill the empty seat down here and join in the conversation. And one of us will vacate our seat so that there are only 3 presenters down here. Now, no one ever wants to start straight out of the gate. And so we have the 3 of us to get you started on the subject of the forthcoming regulation of the European software industry. And this was triggered in part by a piece of legislation called the Cyber Resilience Act that was promulgated by the European Commission and then the European Parliament last year, and starting just before that in 2022. And so the 3 of us are going to introduce you to that. Camille is going to give us an overview of the landscape of the legislation that's coming down the track. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how the open source community got involved in the discussion of the CRA. And Stefane is going to tell you how he only did a partial job, and there's still some work to do with the European Commission. And at that point, you will have questions or contributions, and I will feel confident in getting up and leaving my seat for someone to come down here, and I will then moderate the rest of the conversation. So, with that said, Camille, please take it from here.
Okay, so hi everyone. Some of you may know me. For those who don't know me, well, I'm not a lawyer, but I've been hanging around in free and open source software for a few years, and I had to realize that European regulation actually play a very important part, and I have a very tangible impact on the topics we are interested in. And so, for instance, if you take the GDPR, you have a clear demand about that. There's also more recently the Digital Markets Act. I guess most of you are aware of it, and it introduced very interesting concepts like gatekeepers. So it theoretically allows us to pick up old fights that we had quite forgotten about, like bundled sales of open source systems and hardware. So it's really, open source regulation can be a great opportunity for free and open source software, but as we have seen, it also carries, it can carry many risks. Like Simon said, with, I think the Cyber Resilience Act was a very good example of that. And we have the new Product Liability Directive, which is also coming. And so the problem with these 2 regulations is that they will, the non-warranty and limitation of liability clause we have in our open source license, can't be trusted anymore as such. What the impact will be reduced. So, you can't just ignore the regulation because it will really, move the foundation of open source. And so it's important that people who are actually knowledgeable in open source, and I would say people who have a sincere interest in open source, actually can contribute to this regulation, and that's what we could witness with the Cyber Resilience Act, because people could actually produce a real change in the regulations. It was really needed, but it's important that it's people who actually really care about open source, because as it was mentioned in the previous topic, open source washing is a reality now also, and if we, for instance, consider the AI Act, you have a notion of open source artificial intelligence, but which is not defined. And well, we know that it's being defined by the open source initiative. There's a working group about that, but it's not defined in the regulation. So some organization will use this lack of definition to pretend to be open source in order to escape the regulation. So it's really important, to have sincere actors actually contributing to the regulation. And so that's what Stefane and Simon have been doing, and so that's why I would let them talk now.
And just to be clear, Camille, that's not the only legislation.
Oh no,
type.
no, sorry.
There's a whole load of other stuff that's
Yeah.
that's going to be coming at us.
Yeah, you have the Data Act and so on. I mean, that's why it's really, I mean, a lot of work, and that's why it's also important that people have time to, I mean, are able to dedicate time to it, and that's why the appel. I hope everyone knows about the appel. I mean, they're trying to, I mean, they have starting already being more active in Brussels, but they need funding, of course, because that takes time. And so, yeah, you can fund the appel if you want to really help in an efficient way about that.
Yeah. So there was only so long that we could assume that we could hide behind no liability clauses in capital letters at the end of licenses and see the software industry effectively exempt from regulation in Europe. We got away with it for a really long time, but unfortunately, or fortunately if you prefer, it's over now. It doesn't matter what you say in the license about how you don't take any responsibility or present liability responsibilities towards any of your users. Once the Cyber Resilience Act and the Product Liability Directive become current legislation in Europe, which is around about 2026, you will have liability. There's no way for you to escape it. What you can do is mitigate that risk by complying with the Cyber Resilience Act. But when we first saw the Cyber Resilience Act, which was in December 2022, we realized that whoever had written it hadn't been speaking to people who understood open source the way that open source people understand open source. The lead author of the Cyber Resilience Act proudly spoke at FOSDEM about how open source had been excluded and protected. And then I gathered the views of a lot of communities and wrote them on the OSI blog at the end of January in 2023. And the consensus view of every open source organization that looked at it was that the CRA as it stood exposed the open source community to massive risk and liability and did not in any way usefully exclude open source from the scope of the CRA, because it seemed to assume that all open source was modules in CPAN or in an apt repository. It seemed to assume that all open source was either a device for a multinational to avoid its responsibilities towards developers, or was something done by hobbyists. And the assumptions that had been made had led the CRA to accidentally include liability for pretty much everyone we could think of that was actually developing open source in Europe. So the open source community unusually got together en masse. The Open Forum Europe kindly provided a venue. Many organizations found each other through this activity. So many of us discovered NLNet Labs for the first time, and Martin Ertzen from there, who had written a wonderful blog on the subject. And we started asking, what can we do about this? It turned out that if you found the names of the people who had written the Cyber Resilience Act and you sent them emails, they were really smart, friendly, happy people who wanted to talk to you. And so a whole load of us went and spoke to them and went and said what was wrong with the CRA. And to cut a long story short, over 2023, the CRA was substantially modified to largely exclude community-hosted open source from the scope of the CRA. In fact, it went so far as to create a new category for activity called a software steward, which augmented the role of a consumer or a manufacturer, which were the previous two roles in relation to software, and created a separate regime in the CRA for software stewards. So organizations like Eclipse or like the GNOME Foundation or like Apache are all going to be software stewards, not manufacturers, and will have a much lighter weight regime to guarantee their liability responsibilities, and also no penalties for failing initially to achieve those goals. So that's all great, and we discovered that actually if you go engage, the people who do open source legislation at the European Union are some of the nicest, smartest people in the world, and you really should go meet them and make friends with them. And that's, I think, the best advice that came from thinking with Camille about this. We have to go engage. Now, the problem that we have in going and engaging is that we aren't one big multinational corporation with a well-funded legal department who can send 20 lawyers to go visit the European Commission every Tuesday. That's not something we can do. So how do we do this? Well, one of the ways is through the organizations like Appel, like OW2 engaging, and that's been happening as well. But that has unfortunately then left a gap, because the understanding of open source as just being about community open source misses out a big section of Europe's open source community. And so that's over to you, Stefane.
Yes, so today I'm representing two major open source organizations in Europe, CNLL, the French National Federation of Open Source Businesses, and Appel, which is a European Federation of National Organizations that represent open source businesses. And we represent mostly small businesses, SMEs, sometimes a little bit more, but I guess that given the size, the average size of an open source company in Europe, which, for instance, in France is roughly 20 employees, that's who we represent. And I will talk quickly about two things. First, a little bit of history, describing what have been done by these two organizations during the last 2 years with regard to the CRA, and the initiative that we are trying to start, or for both try to help our community to deal with the regulation as it was written and decided by the Commission and the Parliament, but also maybe to prevent similar fiascos in the future. So, like most of us, we heard about the CRA in September or October 2022, and at first we were a bit incredulous. We didn't really understand why the things were written like they were. And it's important to remember that in December there was a big workshop organized by the Commission's OSPO in Brussels, and several of us were invited, and we had a very interesting discussion. And the theme of this workshop was the open source workshop for computing and sustainability. It was all about open source sustainability, both from the funding point of view and from the security point of view. And guess what? None of the people who were responsible for drafting the CRA were present at this workshop. And that's very strange, because on one side you have an OSPO, which is a very strong, very powerful structure that can really help open source adoption within an organization. On the other hand, you have, it's called, I think, Office H2, which is responsible for cybersecurity. And these people, as we understood, don't talk to each other, and they don't work with each other. So the people that really know about open source are not consulted by the people who are regulating open source for the Commission. Then afterwards, things got a little bit out of hand. We sent open letters, we sent letters to the Commission. We tried to have meetings with various people, and it was completely unsuccessful. And in the end, we haven't talked to anyone in the Commission as CNLL or as Appel on this issue. So I think the lesson for me, one of the first lessons, is that when an organization, a government organization or a supranational organization, has an office that is comprised of mostly specialists, people that really know a subject, they need to work with the other civil servants that are working on topics that are really related to this subject. And especially the people that are responsible for the industrial policy part of the European or the national organization at the national level. Now, what can we do now? So at Appel's level, as Simon said, we are trying to set up Appel, and we, for the last 4 years now, have been setting up Appel as an organization that really can represent the business ecosystem for open source in Europe, that should be consulted by the Commission and that is consistently ignored by the Commission, except by the OSPO. In the near future, we hope to hire someone who will be present in Brussels and will do this kind of job. We need money to pay him or her, but actually it will be a him probably. So if your organization can contribute to this effort, you can talk to me or to other representatives of Apple. Second thing, with CNLL at the French level, but there are also similar initiatives in other countries in Europe, especially in Germany. We have set up a working group to work on the CRA, to work on the consequences on the CRA, to try to help companies, organizations that will be impacted by this regulation, or to read the text first, because I think it's quite a long piece of regulation, and not just the directive, but also all the norms and standards that will be discussed during the upcoming 3 years. I think there are 45 different standards that will be written. It's enormous. And what you need to know, if you are not already aware, is that the CRA will impact your development costs as a small company by increasing the cost by 30%, right? It's not my estimate, it's the estimate that was provided by the Commission in its impact study. So we, as CNLL and as other national organizations, have a duty to our members to try to help them, provide them information, to provide them tips and best practices and so on. I'm working with Inno³, and this is something that we have initiated very recently. If you need more information and if you want to participate, you don't need to pay to participate. We have a flyer that will be available, and there is a mailing list, and we will work during the summer and write a report that will be available at the end of the year. Right. Thank you.
Thank you. So Stefane mentioned there the standardization activity that goes as the follow-on to the CRA. What the CRA is going to require you, if you create a product in Europe that contains digital elements, that's to say software or a piece of hardware that's got digital stuff inside it, you'll be required to CE mark that product if it's made available to consumers. And the CE mark that you're required to put on the product indicates that you have done all the right things to make sure that the product reaches the consumers in a state that is secure and works as described, and that it will be kept in that state in perpetuity while it remains part of your product line, and for a period afterwards as well. In order to be confident as a company that you can put a CE mark on your product, you'll need to check your processes and make sure that they meet the European Commission's expectations. Truthfully, they probably already do. Your question will be how you demonstrate that, should anyone ever audit it, or should your product fall into the category where an audit is required. And so the solution to that in the CRA is to ask the European standards organizations, ETSI, CEN and CENELEC, to produce some harmonized standards that you can comply with that will give you the presumption of conformity with the CRA and allow you to put a CE mark on your products. The big problem with that is that ETSI and CEN and CENELEC don't actually have anybody who understands open source within their organizations, and don't have anyone who is in a position to create standards that satisfy open source. That's a sweeping statement. There are a few people there who do, but generally speaking, their IP policies make sure that open source players tend not to play in those standards bodies. And so participating in the standardization process is going to be a difficult task. And so I do know that Eclipse is putting together a program for open source stewards and for companies that consume downstream code to get ready to be conformant and compliant when the standards come out, and maybe contribute those specs. Do you want to say anything about that? Gail over here is from Eclipse and is doing that. Yes. And I think Camille is going to try and escape.
Okay.
And we're now open for the extra seat, if anyone would like to come down here and join the conversation.
Yes, so thank you, Simon, for mentioning it. So yes, indeed, you mentioned a few things that were very important. And one of them is that last year was a very busy year for all the open source community because of the CRA. And I think that to some extent, we managed to, as a community, to get the less bad CRA possible for our community, or something close to it. Yeah. So far from being perfect, but very well, not so bad. And we know that it will take 3 years and a bit more than 3 years before being into force. And we also know that before that, there is an expectation that there will be standards. So I heard the number of 40 standards, but when you read the standardization request, it's not so impressive. In fact, there are 15 horizontal standards that are on 3 main topics. One is secure by design. Another one is how you manage the software supply chain, and so with SBOMs and etc. And the last one is how you manage vulnerabilities and what kind of infrastructure you put in place to manage vulnerabilities in your product and in your supply chain. And one thing that is interesting is that in last year, we have managed to establish lots of connections and to be in this position that the European Commission and potentially the European standard organizations want to listen to the open source community to help reach the goals of the CRA. But to do that, we need to be in the position to make strong proposals and relevant proposals. And that's why we have created this Open Regulatory Compliance Working Group. The name is not necessarily super exciting. And when
slips off the tongue.
But the goal of this is to gather the community of open source stewards, because there is a lot to be done with open source stewards. In particular, there is a big topic which is managing cybersecurity across the supply chain of open source. And you know that when you have a dependence on one open source project, you may have dependencies on dozens of other open source projects, and to be honest, the security of the end product will be as good as the weakest link in this supply chain security. So the open source software stewards, so foundations and likely potentially a few other organizations, will have to up their game in managing this supply chain security. And we put together this community of stewards of large companies, of smaller companies, and you are very welcome with the CNLL to participate in that. And also of researchers, in order to draft technical specifications, process specifications that explain how to do that properly. And we hope to be able to push that as options to the standardization bodies, so that what we push to them, if it's good enough, will be accepted and adopted and will be a big part of the resulting standard.
Can I
And if you come and sit here. Introduce yourself.
Hello. I have a little bit of a different narrative. Hello, my name is Fukami. I live in Brussels since 10 years. I do like EU policy since 25 years as a civil rights activist, and I used to work as a pen tester and you know, security or like digital waste man. My view to that whole, to the things that were said, like the very first thing is that the people in the commission that dealt with that, or that still deal with that dossiers are very nice, that's true. But they also said that, that they really don't like to talk to all of us. And because it is like, I can, like, that they allowed that to happen was nice, but it is an exception. Normally, they would say, just go away, it's too much, and you guys are crazy. This is really also what they told me. So it's not an achievement, it's more like they were the nice people, and they were able to actually keep up with a very strange environment. Because, and that's the other thing, what went wrong was that this community did not understand what it means to do the right thing at the right time, or like talking to the right people at the right moment about the right thing. So if you have a consultation, you go to a consultation and not doing like an open letter to someone that you don't even address in that open letter. So that's the one part. The second thing is,
Gail?
okay. No, like I have a bunch of things. So Etsy so for example, since it started, like I look at it not just as a European software regulation, I started to look at it like this, but it is a lot more. I look at 180 dossiers because that is what we have. That is Blue Guide, that is like, you know, product guides and software and service security. And no matter what we, like, you know, where you can grasp how complex it gets and what the main issues are, look at the NIS implementation, or like the NIS, how it's in the CRA, because it means we have 21 or now 23 months to come up with hard procedures. Because this is where we have to be able, and it also actually is for stewards, when we deal with known with exploits that are known to be exploited, we have to deal with it. There is no difference between a manufacturer and a steward, in my point of view.
Okay. So I think we should get some responses to you at this point because you're ranting now.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Sorry, yeah. You're absolutely right, yeah.
Let's get some responses. Gail?
Yeah, just one quick answer to your first point is that I think 18 months ago we were completely disorganized and we started to go from everywhere, etc., with open letters, like you say, etc. But I think also that some organizations, including the open source initiative, so Simon is working for the open source initiative on the policy topic, including us, including the Open SSF, because that's your job.
Yeah,
okay.
Brian Behlendorf was in all the meetings for you.
And have hired people who understand policy and who are capable of navigating policy. So I think that we are far from being perfect from the point of view of policymakers. We can still improve the way we communicate to them, the way we are organized, etc. I think something like Apple, for example, can also have a role in there. But what you describe that, oh, those guys are so different and so weird, I think we are past that now.
No. Look,
okay, maybe.
I get, policy advisors from the groups come to me and tell me, like, what people tell them.
Yep.
This is like, and I stand there and say, like, okay, I'm not born and raised in the open source community. I'm a hacker, not an open source person. So this is like, but now I am, and so it means for me, I say, oh, it's all fine, but it is still weird. For me, it is weird because the civil rights people, for example, that also took it took them 20 years, but they managed to have that in a way that is a little bit more structured and effective. The effectiveness here. We are so many groups.
Yep.
And
Okay. Yep.
there is something that we have to make together.
So that's exactly what we're trying to do, because I remember going and talking to Benjamin Bergel about this, and he said exactly what you said. He said, we don't know who to believe. He said, we keep on getting organizations coming to us and saying they speak for the open source community, organizations like Meta and the Linux Foundation and OpenSSF, and we don't know who to believe, he said. And so we took that to heart, and we tried to make sure he had as few people visiting him as possible.
But it cannot be, or it was not in the last 2 months, for sure.
but so we're not getting there.
Because, look,
but this
I
isn't
don't
the
talk
world.
to
So I also campaigned against the Software Patent Directive in 2005. And
As well.
I ran this. So I ran Sun Microsystems interference on that, and Kiran and I often think about that. But the world has changed a lot since then, and in the meantime, a new generation has come, and that old generation has moved on, and there's only older people with I mean, I think I'm probably older than you, but
no, I'm older than you.
You're older than me. Okay, this is good. There's only older people who even remember that last time around, and we're having to invent again. But I think we're actually doing a reasonable job of inventing again. We've got a single place to go build the counter standard and to help Senelec work on that.
Look, that is the other thing. The way to look at it and to say the standards are the center of the CRA is a wrong understanding of what that regulation actually is. And this is, we have fundamental disagreements on what we look at. And that makes it very, very difficult to actually come up with a coherent strategy. This is why I do like the thing to say we focus on the CRA first, for the simple reason that at least has the one part that we have to have very early, that is like vulnerability handling in general. We have to have that early, especially in our community. And then to see from there how we can actually do the rest.
With the greatest respect, because I see this man stalking me.
Yes, I just take the mic for, I should say, less than 1 minute. What I mean is, I don't know what will be voted in the end exactly, so what will happen. So I'm somewhat expecting that to know maybe what to do or not, because OW2 is also a foundation. It can be considered what is defined as a potential steward in the legislation. So what will be exactly the duty and responsibility of a steward? We wait to see if it will be then possible for us as a social economy actor to provide a solution to our members to obtain a kind of CRA stewardship that would not be more expensive than a membership, that could be included in our services, that would be, non-intrusive for them in terms of IP. We don't want to take the IP from people. So if we can do that with people from the community, like, for example, the CNLL, like, for example, the people from Hermine and so on, we will try to set it up. If it's not possible, we will just give up and let other actors do that for money. That's all I wanted to say. So I hope we can do that with being as little impactful as possible, because SMEs can't bear that effort. But if we can't, we just won't try to. I mean, so we know we have to wait, and we hope that legislators will be somewhat reasonable people.
Thank you. And we give Pierre-Yves extra time over the red numbers because it's his conference. But we do have to stop.
2 minutes.
But we do have to stop here. So I'd like to thank the panel very much for participating here. If you'd like to continue the conversation, OSI has a discourse at discuss.opensource.org. and we have some posts about the CRA that you can reply to, or you can start new topics with your own questions, and we would love to see you discussing this there, because we need to talk to, the key thing is to talk to each other and coordinate our efforts. And maybe you need to replace Brown Behlendorf at the IFE meetings, I don't know. Anyway, thank you very much, and it's coffee time.